Right, we all set? Fab. So hi everyone. Lee, you can just do a quick introduction for the session.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the webinar today. Really looking forward to this. We've got a really great panel. So just give you an introduction. My name's Lee Gilbert. I'm Marketing Director here at Nourish Care. And I just hand you over today to our host, Paul, who can carry on with introductions.
Right, thanks Lee, thanks for setting all this up. So hi everybody, I'm Paul, I'll be chairing today. So my role at Nourish, I'm the product manager for our analytics and BI suites, and my background is social care pretty much through and through until I started working at Nourish. So I've worked for learning disability providers for 17 years, makes me feel really old, but something like that, 17, 18 years. So but yeah, I've been with Nourish for about 3 years now. So yeah, really excited about today. So we're just going to do some introductions and then get straight into the questions. So I've got Lorenzo in my top right, so I'm going to go straight to you if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name's Lorenzo Gordon. I'm a co-founder and director of Maldaba. Maldaba's been around since 2002. We're a software development and solutions agency based in London, and we really focus on solving difficult problems using web and mobile technology for the public and not-for-profit sectors. And since 2014, we've been working on technology with and for people with learning disabilities and other cognitive impairments. Originally, it was called My Health Guide, but it's now called Hear Me Now, to support people with learning disabilities and the people they work with to plan and implement their health and care needs on a daily basis.
Awesome, thanks Lorenzo. And Charlotte, I've got you next on my screen, if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Downing. I'm Membership and Engagement Manager for the TSA. The TSA is the Tech Services Association, and we are a national governing body, advisory body for the tech-enabled care sector. We work with organisations across kind of health, housing and social care to enable people to access technology to build more fulfilling lives and to kind of utilise it in daily life. My background prior to the TSA is SEN education. I've got a real kind of passion for that kind of side of support. So yeah, really excited to kind of be on this panel, but also to kind of learn from Lorenzo, from Andrew, from Paul, and from Nourish themselves. So thank you for attending.
Great, thanks Charlotte, and over to you, Andrew.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Kendall and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Alternative Futures Group, and they are a charity based in the northwest of England, been around for about 31 years. We support about 1,000 people with a learning disability or a mental health condition. And I've been really interested for the last few years in how technology can be used to improve people's lives. So spend a lot of time on that agenda. So great to be part of this webinar and look forward to the Q&A a bit later.
Right, thanks Andrew. And just on that point, there are 2 options here on Zoom. So there's a chat option and a Q&A. So we just encourage everyone to point you in the direction of the Q&A, and then we'll see those coming in. I think Lee's going to help field a few of those questions as we go, and then we'll have sort of 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end, depending on how we are for time, where we'll try and tackle some of those questions. So yeah, do pop them in the Q&A. Okay, so we're going to jump in. And when we met last week, Lorenzo, Charlotte and Andrew and I, we were talking as like a starting point around this idea of like 4 quadrants of tech. So we kind of got hardware and software, and then we've got support for the people we support, and then for providers. So I think just wanted to hear from each of you, Lorenzo, Charlotte and Andrew, where you saw what you do, what you're most excited about in those sectors, and how blurred those boundaries are. So thinking hardware and software, and then provider side, and then the actual people we support side. So Charlotte, I think I might just jump in with you if that's okay.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Yeah, of course. So from the TSA's perspective, we're seeing sort of an increased demand and an increased conversation around both hardware and software. Just generally, I think people are more aware of the fact that that's needed, it's required, it needs to be, I guess, an integral part of care packages rather than an afterthought. I think that's always a really, really good positive sort of opportunity. I think there's little pockets of brilliance that we're seeing on both sides, sort of hardware and software. I think they're not scaled yet that we're seeing, but they are I think they are coming through, and those little pockets of brilliance are definitely kind of starting. Conversations are definitely kind of widening in terms of the sector and what it needs, what support staff need, what individuals need to be enabled and to kind of build their own outcomes. In terms of, I guess, kind of opportunities, there's obviously kind of things like data insights that can drive kind of proactive care rather than reactive support. I think that's a definite opportunity within kind of hardware and software. And I think actually the biggest challenge / opportunity within that is actually kind of enabling staff to understand that this is not about putting in a piece of kit or putting in an item of support that takes away those meaningful hours of human contact. It's actually kind of building on that support package so that you've got the human side and then you've got the tech side as well, kind of working collaboratively to ensure that both sides are kind of maximising that person's outcomes. I think that's kind of the biggest opportunity. And I think ensuring that workforce and staff know the opportunities, but also kind of see the benefits to themselves as well as to the people they support from the hardware and the software. In terms of examples, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to kind of name names and recommend any technology, but if anybody kind of does have questions about specifics, if I'm not allowed to name names, by all means do get in touch with the TSA, because we're always happy to share those examples of what people are doing and where people are driving this in a really, really nice way. I think there's potential for progression and there's room for progression, and I think the TSA want to be part of that. We want to be part of that story. We want to be sharing these examples of great practice, and we want to be sharing what people are doing well, as well as learning from what people are doing well. So yeah, do get in touch if you have any examples of brilliance, or if you want any examples of brilliance.
There's definitely a lot out there. So Lorenzo, I'll just hand over to you, and maybe just picking up on that point that Charlotte had as well about users, particularly staff members. I've seen that a little bit as well, of people feeling like maybe technology is not for them, like people maybe that have been in the industry for a long time, but have worked in the sector for a long time. And yeah, I think it's something you probably thought quite a bit about, like how do you make things accessible on both sides?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I think I agree with everything that Charlotte was saying. Firstly, about kind of how things like hardware and software need to be integrated right at the start and not come as an afterthought. And in terms of the point about staff, absolutely. All staff get involved in care in order to help people, and they all want to help people. But there's nothing wrong with helping them also understand how using technology and how using software solutions and hardware can also benefit them directly in their job. It's not an either or. And when I was reflecting on the 4 quadrants, I'd say they're all so closely interrelated, and we see that a lot in our work. So because we work across health in terms of working with NHS trusts, primary care and the ICBs, but also in the care sector, there's no good people commissioning Hear Me Now if people don't have the devices to run it on, for example. There's no good providing that technology to people with learning disabilities if they're not also getting the support to use it, and different people with different disability levels need different amounts of support from the staff and their family and carers. So I don't know that it's necessarily blurred, but it is all very, very closely interrelated, and it needs to be looked at holistically, which is why I picked up on that point in Charlotte's. And there's kind of just one other thing I'd quickly add into that often staff will look at something like Hear Me Now and they'll say, well, this particular person I'm working with has such complex needs that they'll never use it, and therefore they won't benefit from it. And we have to go quite slowly and quite gently and explain that there's a difference between using it and benefiting from it. And we have really, really good case studies of where people may not hold the device physically themselves, but nonetheless derive huge benefit from their engagement and interactivity with multimedia, and benefiting from the consistency of communication and transfer of information between the different organizations. So that subtlety between use and benefit, I think, is also crucial to this conversation.
Definitely. Thanks, Lorenzo. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I agree with what Charlotte and Lorenzo have said. I think from my perspective, I'm really interested and passionate about the people we support having access to basically the same types of devices that everyone else uses in their daily life, a smartphone, a tablet. It's amazing what you can do with smartwatches these days, and I think that will develop. So I think having that as a platform, and then obviously there's some great apps around, some of which are for wider use and some of which are specifically for this group of people. I think looking more on the sort of staff side, I think obviously we are seeing that blur, aren't we? I think what's really important is that information that maybe previously have been held by staff, should be shared with the people supported very openly as part of their support plan and their circle of support. Visibility to families. So, that blur between both sides of it, I think, is definitely something I'm seeing, and I think there's a way to go on that as well. So, it's a really exciting area.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question around that, isn't it? It's like, as this technology does come in, having that visibility of the person's care and support. So I don't know, well, or any of you guys, if you have some thoughts on what that means for privacy around the person that is receiving support, and what kind of impacts, what considerations there are around that, for example. If any of you want to pick up on any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it is a really important question, and you're absolutely right to raise it in terms of risk, in terms of privacy, in terms of things like GDPR, and data protection, and how, if you're dealing with vulnerable people especially, how are you ensuring that the right information is shared with the right people for the right time, but that the invert of that is true, that people are not sharing information unnecessarily with the wrong people. And there are good, I think, established protocols already from the offline world, things around best interest decisions and exchanges of communication and how you validate people's identity. So I think one of the positive responses is that whilst it's an incredibly important issue, it's not new and it's not unique, and we can learn, and that's what we do at Maldaba with Hear Me Now, is we take those principles of things like best interest decisions and who has authority, and we apply them in the digital sphere. And there is a lot of education that needs to go along with it, because there's a very understandable reaction from people who may feel like, I don't really understand digital technology, I don't understand the risk, and therefore the safest thing for me to do is to just not engage. And I completely understand that, and I get where that's coming from, but that's not sufficient in order to reap the benefits, as Andrew was talking about sharing information, things like digital health passports or about me information. If someone has an urgent episode of care, how else would, for example, paramedics or emergency care staff know about that someone if the information isn't shared? So I think rightly we must move towards sharing, but we need to do it really carefully and sensitively and learn from those really good offline best practices.
Charlotte and Andrew, I don't know if you had any extra thoughts on that, anything you wanted to add?
Absolutely, I think Lorenzo's hit the nail on the head. I think the gain that we get from all the offline of, whether someone's got capacity or not, those best interest assessments is really, really vital to protecting their information, protecting their autonomy, protecting kind of who has access to their private information, and even the less private stuff, because there's some parts of people's life that if they have an activity that they don't want to share, if they've got a personal appointment they don't want to share, making sure that those things are respected and kind of given the opportunity to be respected. I think there's a lot more awareness with certain solutions now that I've seen coming through, where there's the opportunity for the person or for the person's support team to kind of govern that themselves and have that capacity. And I think it ties really nicely back into just the kind of the ethos of co-production, where instead of having care done or support done to you, actually you're involved with how you want to be supported, how you want your provision to look, the ways that you want to be kind of shared or not shared, the information about you. And I think co-production is a really nice way of kind of making sure that from the very, very beginning of any kind of project or tech plan, that actually that person is involved with how they want that to look and how they want that to support them. And I think we're moving towards a much, much better model of that. And I think, Lorenzo, yeah, you're absolutely right. The governance that we already had, if we take the lessons that we learned from that and then we kind of continue to learn, and as you say, as you've gone through with Hear Me Now, you're constantly learning and kind of evolving with the users that you have. I think that's so important to actually kind of listen and say, okay, so we've done this for X amount of years, but actually there's a better way that we can protect that person while still giving them that identity of, this is my support, this is my technology, this is my piece of kit. I think the balance is much fairer now, definitely. And I think as time goes by, it will continue to get better.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking about some of the providers I've worked with, and it definitely is an interesting conversation for the providers to have, knowing, particularly for like family members that might be used to feeling like, actually, we should be able to have access to all of this, and we've got a much more granular way of sharing things. Being able to say, well, actually, the person themselves doesn't want to share this, and that can often be, I've worked in that transition point between children and adult services, and that's obviously quite an interesting conversation for people to have. Andrew, as a service provider, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo those thoughts. I think obviously you've got to try and strive for the best outcomes, haven't we, which often does mean sharing. I think from a provider perspective, it's around going through the right governance and checks before something's deployed, and I think that's, you know, from my perspective, that's pretty clear. And I think as a provider, it's about making sure you've got that process to work through any risks or issues and make sure that what needs to be documented gets documented.
Right, so moving on, we have a question that was so there's a view that people with learning disability don't use or don't access digital technology. Is that true, do you think? As in, like, is the perception true, and how would we challenge that perception? Andrew, I might ask you to kick that one off, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I guess, is it true? Absolutely, definitely not. So I would say the majority of people that I know and have met with a learning disability use technology as a very natural part of their life. And I think, you know, people have a wide range of interests. You know, people use VR, people have laptops and are super into gaming and all sorts of things, down to kind of eye gaze software. So people, you know, I think it's definitely not true that people don't use technology. Is there a perception by the sector? I think, yeah, I think there's definitely something in that. I think that there is a view that perhaps not so much understanding of actually what potential there is. So we tend to look at, okay, this person needs a member of staff, or they need this type of support. Actually, are there alternatives? Can technology play a role? Can unpaid support, you know, community assets, can they be part of someone's support plan? Absolutely. So I think there's more to do, but definitely not true.
Yeah, Lorenzo, Charlotte, I'm sure you both have a view on that one as well. Yeah, whoever wants to jump in first.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, at the risk of repeating everything that Andrew said, I think he's absolutely spot on. I think there is this perception that that it's almost kind of, you know, there's no tech there. There absolutely is tech there. There's technology in place. I think one of the biggest challenges is actually kind of utilising the tech that's in place and kind of looking at it and going, how can this support that person, rather than kind of having two separate piles of tech and, you know, frisbeeing a piece of technology out and saying, this is what we want you to use from now on. If someone uses an iPad, if someone uses the, you know, Apple Music, or, you know, there are loads of other streaming services, but if someone uses that, for example, as a support system or as something that they use for downtime, or, you know, building independence, or any of those things, how do we add in and build that kind of interoperability between what you've already got versus the outcomes that you want to kind of be supported to achieve? And how do we kind of overlap where you are versus where you want to be using the technology that you already have? And I think the possibilities are now so much wider, and I think there's definitely a sense of there's more possibility, but there's more, I think, awareness of the fact that, yeah, technology is everywhere. And, you know, we have an autistic 17-year-old who has an Apple Watch and an iPhone, and the best thing that we've ever done is use an app that gives him kind of regular routine reminders, that just gives him that kind of organisation to his day, without me, I hate the word nagging, but nagging him to say, have you done your homework? Have you done this? His Senko, his teachers, all of his support team can kind of add into this. No one's isolating him in terms of, oh, you need this specific piece of technology when you're in school, so you stand out to everybody else. There's no difference between him and his peers, but that technology just gives that kind of just enough support using something that he's already kind of grown up with, which I think for me is valuable, but it's valuable, but for him is more valuable because it doesn't isolate him from his peers and it doesn't make him feel, you know, or there's something different about me, or there's something to kind of be ashamed of, or to have to hide. If you can put that provision in at that level where someone's already using a piece of technology and they have that ability and that capacity to use it, that's the way we need to be looking at integrating care into sort of supporting people more routinely, definitely.
Absolutely. Lorenzo.
Yeah, we're going to sound like a choir, but I completely agree with what everyone's saying on this. I mean, you may as well say, not you, Paul, one may as well say there's a perception that people don't use digital technology. You know, people with learning disabilities are a very wide, diverse group of people. Not everything is right for everyone, but like with what everyone else is saying, we've seen copious examples of people with learning disabilities using digital technology. And sometimes I think that phrase, digital technology, kind of gets in the way of it. They don't think of it as digital technology. None of us do. We just go on our banking app or we go on YouTube because these are just essential parts of our everyday, and that applies just as much to people with learning disabilities. I think that what is true is that historically in the past, technology providers have not given sufficient thought to the accessibility of digital tools to people with learning disabilities and their needs. And therefore, one of the things that I feel very kind of proud about with Hear Me Now is that it's providing tools that already exist in a disparate fashion on a phone, for example, but pulling them together in a way that is useful and helpful and accessible to people with learning disabilities. So there is that genuine barrier that can then lead to a perceived barrier by, for example, staff or family members that people they support wouldn't be able to use technology, but it's just not true. And technology providers are getting much better at doing things like we do about making the software, the hardware as accessible as possible.
Yeah, on that point, I was just thinking about a provider that I was working with a few months ago, and when they were coming across, they were doing their care plan training. That was their terminology, care plan training. They weren't doing it on, this is on Nourish, this is on an app. They were like, this is just your new care plan training. And it just happens to be on a device now. And I thought that was a really nice approach. It wasn't like, we're training you on how to use this other system. It's like, you're doing what you've always done. Now you're just doing it in a slightly, you know, you're doing it in a different medium, but it's the same stuff. You know, you're still providing support and care. So, okay, so we're going to move on. So what do you see as the big opportunities around digital technology in the learning difficulties and disability space? And maybe alongside that, kind of what are the downstream impacts for an ICB when people aren't properly supported? It's almost like, what are the big pain points that we see at the moment that we think we're going to get solved, or you're starting to see getting solved right now? Lorenzo, might go back to you for that one, if that's okay, to start us off.
Well, I think the first thing to say, certainly from Maldarba's perspective, is that nothing we do regarding digital technology is ever designed to replace people. There's often an understandable kind of hesitation that the technology is there to do something instead of a person. And in some areas that's correct, but not here. What we're trying to do is support and augment people to be as independent as possible, or provide high quality care as consistently as possible to the best of their ability. So we very much see technology as a tool, as an empower, as an implementer, but the solution is always people. It is always human, and a huge part of our work is around really what we kind of call the professional services. It's about supporting people to get the best use out of technology. It's not trying to replace them, and that kind of leads into, you know, the opportunities is that we see a lot of problems, very serious problems that occur because small bits of information that are really important do not transfer in a timely manner between, for example, a GP and a care provider, or if someone's been in hospital, between an inpatient unit and their family, or the day service. And that lack of transference of information we've seen cause very severe repercussions, like hospitalization all over again, or additional conditions that then need to be treated, or overprescription, or incorrectly kind of putting somebody in an inpatient and having them there for much longer than they need to be. So the real opportunity, along with supporting the independence and best sort of healthy outcomes for that individual, is that we reduce those things in line with things like the STOMP agenda, and trying to make sure that, you know, as per leader reviews, that people are not being admitted into hospital when that's not the best thing for them. And it comes down to something as big and as simple as making sure that that communication and that information flow that's entered once and then it travels to the right place, you know, whether it's entered into, for example, Hear Me Now, and then travels to Nourish, or goes into a shared care record and becomes part of the reasonable adjustments flag. Those opportunities, I think, are massive in terms of the impact on people's lives, and are really exciting.
Yeah, I was just thinking again about another provider that was saying one of the big impacts that we've had is people not having to feel like they're being asked the same question again and again and again when someone's transitioning either into or out of a service. You know, it's like, we filled out this form and now we have to do it again, and now we have to do it again. And so some of that, where that information can be transferred and appended to as the people are going through the process, is really helpful. Charlotte, thoughts on that one?
I feel like, as Lorenzo said, this is going to be a choir because we're just going to sing from the same hymn sheet. But absolutely, I think, yeah, I think there's so many opportunities with ICBs because they are more collaborative, because they're more open to learning from the neighbours and from each other in terms of what other local authorities are doing, what other care providers are doing. The potential is there for us to share knowledge, share best practice, share learning, share all of that important stuff, and communicate on a much greater level in terms of what's working, what's not. I echo completely the ethos around kind of that communication on an individual level as well. But on a wider level, I think obviously, you know, everyone's seeing increased budgetary kind of pressures, huge strains on resources, whether it's kind of workforce or otherwise. And I think this is an opportunity to almost kind of correctly position tech as an integral part of support services to ensure that those strains can be reduced, so that the people obviously at the end of those support systems are still served and supported and protected and nurtured as best as possible. But also the workforce and the carers and the informal carers, the family networks, on every tier, all of those people are supported and enabled so that they are, I guess, recognised for the work that they're doing as well. Because, you know, obviously there's a huge turnover issue with support staff at the moment. There's a huge workforce issue in terms of, you know, recruitment. If we can build support provision in from ICB level all the way down to the grassroots support level, that then enables people to feel kind of, you know, I'm doing a great job, but B, I'm actually having time to take a break between sessions, or I'm able to, you know, kind of think about the longer term support that I'm providing for this person, because I'm not just doing the immediate reactive knee-jerk support, because actually tech is kind of taking some of that weight off of their shoulders. And I think the ICBs have this opportunity to save money, to save resources, but also to free up certain resources to actually kind of change the way that we offer those resources, and to make sure that they're more kind of evenly spread across systems. And I think, yeah, there's a huge opportunity. And I think actually kind of, you know, we could kind of say, well, why are we doing this now? It needs to be done, and this is a really good opportunity for, yeah, all of that knowledge, all of that understanding to be supported, but also for it to be shared on a much wider scale. And to have those examples of really great practice within ICBs would be an absolute dream come true for us at the TSA. We constantly kind of look for those really good examples, those really bright kind of shining stars within care provision, and that they are out there, but there aren't loads and loads of ICBs kind of going along with this mindset at the moment. And actually, if we can kind of put some more brains together and kind of go, okay, so how can we change things? How can we build a little bit more of that element of sort of, you know, recognizing the long-term support that needs to reduce the long-term acute needs? That's where we need to be driving this.
Andrew, years of provider, I'm sure you've got some views and things that you've seen.
Yeah, so I'm going to come at it from a different perspective, you know, in terms of the people I know with a learning disability. What is it that's important to them? What do they want? So number one is friends, job, keep keep healthy in terms of health and well-being. And the other thing is obviously be as independent as they can be. So I think in terms of the opportunity for technology and the things that probably I kind of focus on from our perspective, it is those four things. It's the how do you build more independent living skills? How do you help people become more employable or stay in employment? How do you help with health and well-being? And how do you help with social networks, perhaps making new friends, widening people's networks? So put all of those things together, you know, the impact on individuals, the families, the wider community of doing that well is absolutely immense. So I think that's the, you know, that's the opportunity.
That's a really nice perspective. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so I'm going to move on. This is probably the really big one. Can technology save money and free up capacity at the system level? Charlotte, I'm going to pick on you first for that huge question.
I think yes. I think it's really, really easy to be glib and just kind of go, yeah, absolutely, and not be able to evidence that. And obviously we would at some point begin to kind of build those outcomes frameworks that actually really do evidence those cost savings. I think it's a bigger job than just a kind of an instant, you know, in 6 months' time, we're going to have all of these savings. I think we need to look longer term at savings. We need to look at things, not just return on investment in terms of the financial side, but the workforce hours in terms of if someone's care package provides cover for, you know, nights, for waking nights, is there technology that we can put in that enables someone to, you know, low level lighting so that they're not a risk of falls? Is there something that we can put in that alongside that builds those independent skills that longer term reduces that need for so many waking nights or for so many kind of so many hours of support? I think, yeah, I think we need to evidence it. I think that's something that is not lacking, but something that we need to continue to do, and we need to kind of push harder for that evidence. But I think also we need to, as I said, look at not just the financial implications, but the actual working hours implications and the support for, you know, whether it's families that are giving their time or whether it's support workers giving their time, and making sure that those returns are actually kind of beneficial for everyone, from all the way, you know, at the top of commissioning all the way down to families, carers, support networks. All of those people can kind of see their benefits and their returns. But absolutely, I think in an ideal world, yeah, we would have that evidence now. I think because LD is a relatively untapped market within assistive technology at the moment, we perhaps don't see the evidence so much as we would with sort of adult social care and older people's, and the way that we can evidence a lot more of the returns there. But the goal long term is to definitely start to see those investments paying off in terms of, you know, increased independence, increased access to education, employment, however, Andrew, you know, with the things that Andrew said that are so vital for health, well-being and wellness. Yeah, I think eventually in the years that come, as this goes further and further and as this widens, we will see huge results with this. And I think the earlier we embed simple, straightforward, easily accessed technologies, the longer term potential savings, and the longer term the potential outcomes, you know, with each sort of, you know, access to education, with, you know, doors open when people have access to education, doors open when people have access to social support or social groups. The more we see those doors open, we see improvements in mental health, in wellness and in physical health. The long term, I genuinely believe that we will see huge improvements in all of those areas, and it's just a case of getting people to buy in from a commissioning level, to almost kind of say, we don't want to see results in 3 months. We're not going to come back in 3 months and kind of, we want to see, you know, all of the savings. We're going to invest in this for the long-term future, so that people coming through transition services now, by the time you get to 65 and you're at that point where you need perhaps more technology with, you know, sensors and monitors and stuff, actually you've been enabled throughout that entire life of living to do so much more than you would have done without that provision, without that kind of low level support. I think that's where we need to do more, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Lorenzo, over to you for that one.
Well, let's just take it as read that I agree with Charlotte, because obviously I do. I think there are some very salient points in what Charlotte has said. I think to answer the question, yes, it can save money, and happy to invite people to visit the impact section of the hearmenowapp.com website, where we've done our best to evidence our own experiences of that and quantify that to demonstrate how it can be done. But the complexity around this is enormous, to the point that I understand that budgets are really stretched and business cases have to be justified. I completely get that. But it feels like the wrong question to ask, in a way, for two main reasons. One is that, as Charlotte has already said, it may save money in 2, 5, 10 years' time. If you've got a project that is 12 months or bound by tax years, or less than 12 months or even 18 months, the chance of you being able to effectively deploy, get it up and running, get the work going through, produce the case studies and analysis, and demonstrate that that has a financial kind of net benefit within that time, that's a really tall order, which it brings me to the second point, which is that it's really complicated. And where will it save money? It's quite possible that sometimes the intervention will increase load in certain areas because you're having a greater degree of communication. So you're spending more time, but actually that's really good, because that additional time you're spending supporting someone, for example, with the remote support that you can do using Hear Me Now, where you can share information. And we've seen really good examples of GPs using that to avoid people ending up in hospital. Doesn't necessarily save the GP time, but it saves the NHS Trust resources. Similarly, if the care provider and the GP are talking really well, the care provider may be spending more time, but that person doesn't become an inpatient. So there are huge complexities around who it is saving money for and at which point, and how you can collect evidence of things that don't happen in order to show that it saved money and that it was better to spend the money on an intervention like Hear Me Now. So I feel like all of us, commissioners, ICBs, providers, people like Maldaba, are all put in a very difficult position where we are being tasked to look at it in financial terms. And I understand why that's the case. It just feels like being set up with the wrong set of rules in the first place.
Yeah, I remember when I was on the provider side of the fence for this and thinking that actually we were going to put some systems in that weren't necessarily going to save us money, but they were going to help with staff productivity, because we know lots of the services we provide are over capacity. We know that staff are really burnt out quite a lot of the time, and they have really difficult, really complex jobs. So what we were seeing, I think, is what you were saying, almost like an easing on the system a little bit, that staff have got a little bit more time and can actually kind of breathe into their role a little bit more. But you're not necessarily seeing some pounds and pence at the end of it, but hopefully what you see is less staff burnout and a happier kind of working culture. So Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree with that last point that Lorenzo made. The wrong way to think about technology is this sort of magic wand, and you sort of wave it and all of a sudden the savings are enabled and everything's happy. The technology can enable savings and improvements, but largely it's done as part of a wider service transformation, a different model, a different way of working. I think that's where the power comes in. If you kind of look at, so contentiously, I think there's actually fairly significant scope for savings in this sector. And the reason I say that is because there's limited capacity to review care packages on a frequent basis. So actually there is savings potential, but I believe that the bigger areas around accommodation, using the right equipment, non-digital equipment there, looking at the kind of staffing models, looking at community resources, technology is probably towards the bottom, and all of those factors need to be considered to actually get the best service and the most cost-effective thing. So I think the thing about me is, not seeing it as that direct enabler, but actually the technology is part of a different, better service, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make complete sense. Okay, so why do you see, or is now the right time for this transition for people to, particularly ICBs and other funding bodies, to lean into this space with technology? And if it is the right time, why is it the right time? Charlotte, pick on you first.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the right time. I think a combination of factors, coming out of COVID, we're so much more we're so much more overstretched in terms of resources in every possible way, in kind of health, housing and social care and education as well, that actually if we can kind of collaborate and build, it sounds really kind of Andrewish with the magic wand, but if we can build a better future longer term and put things in place now, then absolutely we should. I think also there's the fact that we nowadays have an entire range of technology that we grow up with without even thinking about it. Our children's generation are ridiculously tech savvy. They are going to be the generation who have just from birth known how to kind of enlarge a picture. Reading a story to primary school children a few years ago, a little one who came into reception, he loved books but destroyed them every single time, and would sit at story time and kind of go like that on the book, and it took me a couple of days to figure out what he was doing. He was trying to enlarge the picture on a physical book because they didn't have books in his house because he was so destructive. And it struck me as a real kind of wow moment where I just kind of went, oh my word, children are just this generation gonna grow up just instinctively knowing how to use technology. And I think actually if we kind of acknowledge that as part of the future and future planning, it's going to be there whether we integrate it into our lives, whether we integrate it into support systems or not. And if it can build improvements, but also if it can release some of the pressures and relieve some of that workload on individuals who are already overstretched, absolutely it's the right time, and absolutely we should automatically do it. We've got my dad who's 83 and my auntie who's 82. They FaceTime us once a week. The fact that at 83 my dad can pick up a phone and utilize it to FaceTime his grandchildren is terrifying, because you can only see his forehead, but also beautiful, because how exciting that a man who literally had no technology for the first probably 40-50 years of his life, other than a dial-up internet towards that end of 50 years, has suddenly kind of just discovered this whole world of kind of socializing online at a time where his mobility is reduced and his capacity to kind of get out and about is greatly reduced. I think, yeah, it's absolutely the right time. And it's I think proof as well that there's never a point in your life where you can't develop a new skill, or you can't learn a new skill, or you can't embed a new skill that enables you to access something that you weren't previously accessing. And if we look at technology as kind of an opportunity for that, yeah, it's completely the right time on an individual level, but on an ICB level as well, that we just build it into our day-to-day lives and into day-to-day support. Absolutely.
I think one of the things, thank you, Charlotte. I think one of the things we're seeing is obviously all of this, there's a lot of momentum around technology, particularly in the software space, so things are starting to move really quickly. Lorenzo, I wonder if you could just touch on a little bit what you're seeing as like the ecosystem of different products and how they're all starting to talk to each other, and whether you had any thoughts on that and why that might make things the right time to lean in.
I'll do my best. I think you're right, Paul. There is a huge amount of really positive activity and optimism in terms of things like interoperability and the integration of systems. At the moment, it's still quite complicated. It does still take a long time, even with the best of intentions and everyone trying their hardest. And it is moving in the right direction, and it is the right thing to be doing, simply because it's that principle, like you were saying before, Paul, about not being asked the same question over and over, even things as simple as your name and where do you live, that you provide that information once and everybody gets it. And how does that work? Well, that works through interoperability. So it is the right time. I think just to add some cloud into this picture, and to say, why should people be doing it now? Well, because we can. Because the technology and the infrastructure is there, and therefore everyone who might benefit from it has a right to benefit from it and should go ahead. I do think that there's always a risk of making perfect the enemy of the good. So because some things take a long time to get going doesn't mean you shouldn't get started with the technologies now, because they're still better than not having the technologies, even if they're not all the things you want. the slight note of caution I'd add is that there's a danger sometimes of, it's very easy to see technology as the solution. You know, we've got a problem around workforce, let's bring in technology to solve it. Technology doesn't solve it. It can enable solutions. But really digital transformation is just transformation with digital tools. And we support a lot of that work, and we will always bring it back to the transformation again, as I've said before, is around people. So we have to be realistic and careful about what our expectations are. And also we have to acknowledge right now that the health and care workforce are unbelievably stressed and exhausted because of the lack of breaks that they've had over the last few years. And if this is going to be implemented, it needs to be implemented by whole organizations, by whole systems who are saying, we are going to do this, so there's no opt-out, but actually we're going to provide you a lot of support and encouragement and assistance so that you don't feel like it's just one more burden that's going to cause you to feel like you want to walk away from the profession, and actually may provide some benefits to you that kind of keep you excited and energized. The danger often is with small pilots is that it's a sort of side project that people can ignore. And I think that there needs to be a kind of real embracing of these projects by all levels of organizations in order to maximize the opportunity.
Yeah, really agree. Thanks, Lorenzo. Andrew, I'll just hand over to you, and then we've got some really interesting questions that I think we'll pick up.
Yeah, so I'll keep my points really simple. So I think the three reasons why I think now's a good time, or the right time. I think reason number one is people with a learning disability are really keen on technology and having more technology. I see that every day, greater use. Secondly, I've noticed over the last year, commissioners are getting much more interested in the potential of this. So there's kind of interest from that side. The third thing is obviously there's the capability there, as Lorenzo said, we can do this. It's not a lack of the digital tools. It's about resources and investment. I think the caveat to that is, to make it happen, there does need to be more government investment in this area, because without that, you know, it's not going to evolve at the pace that it should evolve. So I think we just need to be realistic about the funding challenges in the sector.
Definitely. I was just thinking, even from like a user experience standpoint, part of it is there's so much that happens in one app or one thing that you're using, like you were saying, Charlotte, that is the same in other places, like how to expand a photo is the same in lots and lots of different apps now. And, you know, things feel much more synonymous. So you can kind of jump from one system to another and kind of sometimes find your way around, which is a good place to be. Okay, we've got some really interesting questions, so I'm just going to pick up a couple of them. I think any of you just want to jump on these, go for it. So I've got one from Mark, which is, I'd be really interested in some detailed stories and scenarios about how digital technology can support things like inpatient discharge, particularly for those whose support needs are identified as complex. This would include technology that is important to the individual, and some simple stories that say this was the need and how this technology supported it. So have we got any examples, particularly around inpatient discharge and how technology has helped in that?
I've got one off the top of my head, if that's okay, Paul.
Ooh, go for it.
With someone who was admitted to hospital because of renal problems, someone with a learning disability. The nurses were trying their best. They weren't learning disability specialist nurses to support that person by feeding them. What they didn't know and what the person was not able to articulate was the very specific position that person had to be put in order to be appropriately fed, so that the food would go down and then they would eat. So somebody brought in to them their tablet that had their Hear Me Now app on it, that had their About Me information, which is the PRSB standard compliant About Me information, that explained all of this to the nurses. And that meant that after a day of them not being fed, suddenly they were being fed, and they were discharged 3 days out quicker than the average, effectively. And it's something as simple as that can have a huge impact on both that person's well-being, but also enabling much more efficient inpatient discharge.
That's a great example. Thanks, Lorenzo. Andrew, Charlotte, did you have anything to add on that one, or shall we move on to another question?
No, I think Lorenzo's captured that perfectly. From TSA membership, we do have examples of kind of members who utilise their support for hospital discharge, and I can kind of send over a couple of case studies to anyone that would like sort of physical ones. But as I say, I really don't want to kind of share businesses on here and kind of go, oh, what about these ones? Because we'll have other people going, why didn't you mention us? So yeah, do get in touch if you want more information about those.
Yeah, I think just for us, what we tend to see is things like an integration between like an EMR and our platform that can really help smooth things. You know, so if someone's had a med error, you can see it in line with the rest of the person's life, and those kind of things. And same, I'm not here to plug Nourish at all, but those kind of integrations are really helpful. Like the context of this thing happening over here is really important in the context of this thing happening over here, and just being able to connect all those pieces together is really important. I've got one from Martin here. So the service is going digital. Is there going to be a way that families can have their own logins if they're unable to visit a service, i.e. they're living abroad or can't get there for another reason?
Already can with Hear Me Now. So Hear Me Now allows people to share information with the people that they trust. Those people, for example, families living abroad, would be able to log in to the Hear Me Now remote interface on the website just via a standard browser, and then can see the information from the app that's been shared with them and can push the information back in the other direction. So it's bi-directional.
Yeah. Andrew, Charlotte, anything you wanted to add on that one? All good.
No, I guess, obviously a lot of modern care management systems do enable that, don't they? So I think it's something that's obviously system dependent, but is becoming more normal.
Yeah, I think it was huge over COVID. There was a big push to kind of be able to do that over COVID, and now most of those systems will have that in place. So definitely. Okay, I've got a question from Robert. Hello, we've got a number of learning disability schemes with non-verbal residents. Apart from AAC, tablets and Alexa, can anyone advise on proactive technology to aid care staff on managing stress events, etc., like they're coming out with in America with the use of wearables? Any particular advice on proactive technology to aid care staff on managing stress events, etc.? Any thoughts on that one?
It's very, very dependent, obviously, on kind of each scenario and each individual, because it's really easy to kind of go, well, this will work for every single person. It's not necessarily that simple. But I think there's things along the lines of kind of social stories that you can integrate into a piece of technology, into an app, for example, that kind of builds up someone's capacity to understand the scenario if they've had that situation kind of preemptively explained. I know that there's a couple of suppliers, who really focus on that, and really focus on that kind of building those skills, building that advice, building that kind of capability of, if this happens, this is what you can do. These are some options that you can choose. But there's also things like VR headsets. I know one woman who uses hers when she's in huge amounts of pain, and I appreciate that's not a high stress situation, but actually it is a high stress situation on top of caused by, I guess, that from the pain. But yeah, she uses this VR headset. Her pain reduces, the stress reduces, the impact on her body is obviously kind of reduced massively. I think there are technologies out there, and definitely we would always be happy to kind of share some of the suppliers, who we know kind of can support that. As I say, it's very kind of individualized, but yeah, I think there are more apps particularly who can offer things like mindfulness, who can offer kind of, that guided support in terms of building someone's or reducing someone's stress levels and reducing someone's sort of friction levels over a period of time, as well as kind of in the moment, actually kind of working what the stresses are, what the triggers are, and then almost kind of working back and saying, okay, so how do we prevent these from becoming such big events? How do we prevent them from, dominating that person's day? And are there things that we can put in place, like reminders or notifications that this event is coming up or that this event is happening? But these are the things that we put in place beforehand so that you're confident, A, getting through it, and B, preparing for it in the first place. I think there's definitely technologies out there that you can utilize. Again, I'm really reluctant to kind of say names, because then but there are definitely ways that you can kind of reduce that stress, and I think it's a long-term impact rather than a short-term impact. I don't think any technology is suddenly kind of, you're going to put a VR headset onto a person and that will be the end of it. I think it's very much an evolution of that person's ability to manage their stress over a longer period of time. But I would say start small and kind of work your way up and sort of figure out those triggers, and then try different technologies, because if you're not trying them, then you're never going to kind of figure out which ones do fit and which ones don't.
I think if anyone's heard me speak before, this is often my soapbox, but I think lots of the opportunity is around understanding. And when I used to try and run MDTs around behaviour, and we were on paper-based stuff, you know, you've got like these hundreds of ABCs and all this stuff kind of flying around that you're trying to make sense of. And then you also, on top of that, have the context of the person's day-to-day life. And I think one of the things we're able to start seeing is making sense of all of that large data that we as people, we're not good at doing that. Machines are really good at doing that and giving us the tools to be able to understand and make choices about how we support people that have more complex behavior and find certain situations difficult, how we can understand them in a better way, particularly for those people that don't communicate verbally. That can be really complex. So, Andrew, Lorenzo, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one? We've still got a few more questions we can
I mean, I'd echo Charlotte's point there. I think understanding the person in as much detail as possible is the way to find the best technology matching. I think the individual that raised the question, I think, is along what you can do with a good wearable device and the right platform is amazing, and that's an area of technology that will develop very quickly. And you know, so I think that's along the right lines, but definitely do that detailed assessment first.
Absolutely. Lorenzo, did you have anything you wanted to add? Or maybe got one more question we could squeeze in.
I don't know if I have more to add of any value to Charlotte and Andrew. I think having that focused on the person is absolutely the right way. We have had some successes with using Hear Me Now because it's multimedia with people who are non-verbal, and if people want to get in touch, either looking at the case studies on the Hear Me Now app website or get in touch with me separately afterwards, I'd be very happy to kind of go into more detail.
This is a big one for our last 2 minutes, but I'm going to give it a try. So this one's from Denise. There are lots of technologies available in this space, but they tend to be procured by local authority teams who are limited by budgets and narrow scope. How can ICBs get more involved to add scale to the deployment of these tools so they can have a greater impact on health and care? It's a bombshell one for the last 2 minutes. But how can ICBs get more involved to add scale?
Is that the time? Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, really simple answer. I think the most important thing is for ICBs to understand the people in this, you know, go out and visit services, meet people, understand them, understand what technology they're currently using, what the potential is, what's currently being deployed, get that really detailed understanding first. I think, again, slightly contentiously, I think, does the NHS really understand social care? I think that's the first thing. That deep understanding is going to unlock a lot. And until you go out and see it, you know, don't make assumptions about what works without that experiential base.
I agree completely, and I just wanted to add that I think one of the main ways that this can be kind of progressed and learned from is actually ICBs kind of utilising their capacity for kind of gaining knowledge to actually kind of recognise that so many arms of social care and provision are completely siloed. So children's services might be completely separate from adult services. A lot of the technology that one uses might actually be kind of capable of supporting the other side, but because there is so little communication between each side, partly because of, you know, just that's the way they've always done it, because there's two kind of branches, but also because staff just don't have time to kind of sit and chat in the office and say, hey, we're using this with such and such demographic, why don't you try using it for that? Actually, I think if they think more collaboratively in terms of, you know, the wider arm, it's not a case of everything has to be sort of siphoned off into older people's, then, you know, LD and then transitions. It can be so much more flexible if we widen that out and kind of look at technology across all ages and across all branches of social care. It gives the opportunity to actually kind of think, okay, so if we put this technology in, instead of doing it here, let's put it over here. and try that, it gives that opportunity to kind of improve services, but also widen that reach and the capability of technology to support on a much wider level. And I think the savings are there then once they've started to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
Sorry, to go for it.
no, I'd agree with that, and I think ICBs are perfectly positioned, and in this sense, I really welcome the arrival of ICBs to have that broadness of vision in the way that Charlotte was talking about, and to be able to bring those people together in the way that Andrew was talking about. And for example, that thing between transitions between children to adults, ICBs are perfectly positioned to manage all of the many different organisations involved in that. And what I would say is that with the relatively small number of ICBs we've engaged with, most of them are actually trying to do that, and they're just beginning to understand their power and their potential. I guess we have to remember they're still new, and they are themselves just adjusting, but that's the real opportunity here.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sorry to everyone that asked questions we didn't quite get a chance to get to, but Andrew, Lorenzo, and Charlotte, thank you so much for joining. And yeah, we'll send out the recording tomorrow to everyone else who was on the attendee list and couldn't quite make it. So thank you to all of you, and yeah, have a good weekend, and hopefully I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.